Well, welcome to another episode of the Financial Armor Show. I am your co-host, Tony Shore, and I'm here with our host, the man with the plan, as I like to say, Brad Cooper, the man himself right here. Brad, how are you?
Tony, I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm so excited about today's radio show, but also, even more importantly, being here live with you in the studio from Minnesota.
Yeah, we're in the Gradient Studios, podcast and recording studios here in beautiful Minnesota. But you're here the right time of year. Fall is the best time to be here.
You know, amen to that. 75 degrees versus Arizona, 175?
Yeah, 75 and sunny here. And at night into the 50s, you leave those windows open, you'll sleep like a baby.
You're right.
Right? How have you been, though, Brad? What have you been up to?
Been doing great, Tony. Just so excited, not only to be here with you and our special guest here, which I'll talk about shortly, but also out of all the training meetings that we go to on a yearly basis, which is several, I would say this week is one of my favorites. This, I think, is the fourth year in a row that I've attended. It's an elite advisor forum.
Yep.
And basically, not only are our money managers, which are some of the best on Wall Street, going to be here and speaking, but their analysts, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BMO, and others. These are experts that you see on TV every day that have been in this industry for 20, 30 plus years.
Yeah.
And we get to sit in there as advisors and listen, ask questions, and really find out what's going on behind the scenes and what's going on in Washington, and really how should we prepare.
Right. I think that's great. And I know some of the top advisors from around the country are there. And then these very large money managers and people that are pretty well renowned in the financial industry and in the investment world especially are there. So that's fantastic. And I know you do that each and every year. It's a chance to learn, see where things are going, because that field is constantly changing, right?
It is, and right now as we're recording this show, we're less than 2 months away from a big presidential election. And
what?
You know, I think, or did I miss that?
I hadn't heard.
Yeah, I believe sometime in November there's a presidential election, I was told. That,
I should get out for that, I think.
But on a daily basis, Tony, as I'm visiting and meeting with our clients and new people, that's a topic that comes up. Wow, are we going into a recession? You know, if the wrong president is elected, what is going to happen to our world in Wall Street? And good news, we got some answers to that today.
Yes, that's where our guest and Brad, what a huge get. Tell the listeners about our guest today.
I am so honored and privileged to have Jeremy Bryan. He is a senior portfolio manager for Gradient Investments. Jeremy's been around for 25 plus years in this industry. Why is that important? Because he has seen the good, the bad, and ugly. And he is one of many responsible for developing and putting together the portfolios that we offer to our clients, and personally what I have as well.
That's huge.
Which have been just amazing. He has taken the time today to answer a few questions and have a conversation with us on not only what's going on in the world today, but he does have a crystal ball I see in front of him, and he can guarantee what's going to happen. No.
Well, Jeremy, great to have you here. I mean, 25 years.
I know.
I didn't know that. You must have started when you were 6.
I wish. I would. Every time I hear it, I'm like, that's not right, is it? And Mr. Cooper, thank you for having me on, for one. But I got to tell you one thing. In September, you can come here. In February, I'm coming to see you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, that's fair, because one area that I will stay away from is Minnesota in January, February, and March.
You are a smart individual for that.
That is super
alone.
smart. Boy, January, February, and March, you hit it on the head. That's why that's when it's the coldest and the worst here.
I always say 46 weeks out of the year I feel lovely for being here. 6 weeks I feel like I'm an absolute lunatic. And those are those 6 weeks.
That's weird. I say the 9 months of winter here in Minnesota is too long.
That is a good point. That is a good point. I do like to see the sun once in a while, and pretty much February's gone. We haven't seen it in February in a long time.
No, usually from the end of December to sometime later in March.
It's like that thing, that orb. It's somewhere.
It's gone. And
but you know who understands this more than anyone, which I think are some of the most brilliant people, is snowbirds.
Yeah.
Especially, we have a lot in Arizona that come from Minnesota.
Yeah, they get it.
They're leaving here in the next month to come to Arizona. Then when Arizona goes from beautiful, sunny 65 to 165 degrees, they're coming back to Minnesota. So my question is, why aren't we doing the same? We could be snowbird advisors, snowbird portfolio managers, snowbird radio host.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, hey, so let's get the wisdom of Jeremy today on the show, because Jeremy, thanks so much for being here. And Brad, I know you have a lot of questions for Jeremy. And Jeremy, you've got hopefully a lot of insight as to what's happening. People are concerned, like, okay, the Fed lowered interest rates, things like that are happening. So,
yes, probably one of the biggest conversations we're having today, in addition to political, is the Feds just came in the last week and made a reduction of interest rates. And the indication is that may happen a couple more times over the next 6 to 12 months. So what are you seeing, and what impact will that have on Americans, retirees, and even Wall Street?
Yeah, it's a great question, because Fed actions can, they're talked about a lot, but they can have a real impact, and no matter who you are, whether you're an investor or whether you're somebody who's going to purchase something. Because I often say, when people talk about interest rates, they ask, is this bad or good? And I always say back to them, it depends on who you are. Right? Because from an asset, from somebody who owns a lot of investments, who wants to generate income from those kinds of things, you kind of want a little higher rates, right? Because you get better rates of return. 5-6% sounds a lot better than 1-2%, right? So that side feels good. And when it's a little bit higher, you don't want it too high, because it can stifle economic activity and things go bad. But from that perspective, the other side of that coin is the spender, right? The spender felt really, really good when it was 0 and 1% interest rates, right? Is when you could get a house for 2.5% mortgage. All of a sudden that goes to 8%. It's a very different argument, right? And so it really does depend on who you are, from the everyday American and the everyday thing that they're seeing, from the side of what does this impact? Well, it impacts everything, and it really is kind of influences what you're going to do with your money. So from an investment point of view, generally this has actually been considered a positive. Because the biggest worry from the Fed was they were going to keep interest rates levels too high and stifle economic activity and actually cause a recession. Because if interest rates are too high, you can't loan money to build a new building and do those kinds of things. So you stop doing that kind of stuff, and the economy shrinks as a result. So that was the biggest fear, is that you're going to stay too high too long, stifle that activity. So this cut was actually looked at as positive from the market side, from that perspective, and saying, okay, the Fed has inflation and jobs. They have to figure that out, but they're at least bringing it down to where there's less of a chance that they could actually cause a recession to come about.
Well, that's good news. The Fed has, data that they rely on that's dependent, but what other data are they looking at, what you're looking at, that indicates maybe future decreases in interest rates?
Yeah. The reason, the real reason they have a dual mandate is really what it's called. It's just a fancy way of saying they gotta look at two things, right? They're looking at full employment. That's what they want. They want full employment. Now, full employment doesn't mean zero unemployment. It just means, honestly, around 4 to 5%, which ironically where we are right now. From that perspective, the other side is controlling inflation. Now, as most of your listeners probably know, we weren't that controlled over the last couple of years. Things got a little out of hand from a price perspective, right? So that's why they were massively increasing interest rates, is to slow that down. Well, they've hit a point now where they've kind of controlled inflation. We're not at the perfect level yet. That kind of 2 to 3% range is kind of where they want to be, 2-ish. From that side, we're kind of close, but we're not quite there yet. But they're confident enough to saying things are coming down into that normal range where we don't have to be as restrictive on the economy anymore. So that's the kinds of things we're paying attention to too. So when we say, what are we looking at in the future? I think for us, to be completely honest, jobs is probably the most important thing that we pay attention to from economic data. Reason's very simple, is if an American has a job or feels like they can get a job, what are they going to do? They're going to spend money.
Yep.
We spend money better than anyone else on the planet. We do. And that's how our economy grows, is we're a 70% consumer-based economy. So when we're spending money, and we're spending money on the things we want to spend on, not on gas, not on food, not on that kind of stuff, but when we're going out to restaurants, we're taking trips, we're doing those kinds of things, we're spending money because we feel confident in our jobs. As a result of that, the economy tends to do well during those periods. If people start to feel like, well, the job's not quite as good as it was before, I don't know, I'm hearing things about layoffs, we're getting less work than we were before, that kind of stuff, what do? They kind of tighten their belts a little bit, and that's not as good for our economy. So generally, that's why we think jobs are the biggest driver. That's what we're probably paying the most attention to. And I think the Fed has now pivoted their outlook and what they're paying most attention to from inflation now to jobs as well.
Sure, because inflation is getting closer to where they wanted it.
Yeah, they kind of did their job there. But now they have to be careful about doing their job on that side and letting unemployment get out of hand, because that can be problematic, just as problematic, if not more problematic, than high inflation.
You're right. In your experience, Jeremy, once we get to this point where we are, interest rates are going down, inflation's going down, what type of time frame have you seen in the past where we'll start seeing gas prices, groceries decrease? Because that is a big issue. Every time I go to the grocery store with my wife, she knows her prices.
Yeah.
She knows what stores to shop at. And some items we're purchasing now versus 4 years ago are 200, 300% more.
Yeah.
So what type of time frame should we expect to start seeing things decline if employment stays strong?
It's a great question, because I always say, when we say inflation is getting under control or inflation is coming down, it doesn't necessarily mean, and it rarely actually means, that things are getting cheaper. What I always say is lower inflation just means things are getting more expensive less fast. That's really all it is, Right. So when it was 7, 8, 9% inflation, things were getting expensive very fast, right?
Yeah.
Is that every time you went to the grocery store, thing was more and more expensive. I think we're getting close to the end of that. Good. The signal that I'm getting from that is not even from the Fed, it's from general consumers, if you will, is that one of the things that we saw come back here recently, have you guys seen the value meals come back again, right?
Yes.
The $5 and $6 opportunities. 2 years ago, those things were gone.
Yep.
Like nobody was offering those again.
Right.
And so from that perspective, that's what you'll see, is that discounting mechanism through just saying, hey, we're not going to make everything cheaper, but we'll make some things cheaper to entice you to come into the store still from our side. And if jobs are holding up, that can actually continue to bring the economy up, and we can continue to go better. What I worry more about is that the value meal doesn't even entice people, because they're just saying, you know what, I'm just not paying it right now. I'm just done.
Yeah.
The biggest one that you mentioned that's actually super important is the gas side of that argument. Is that gas prices actually this year have largely been cheaper than last year on a year-over-year basis. This year versus last year.
They're a lot cheaper.
Lot cheaper, right?
Under $3 a lot of places now.
Exactly right. So that allows people to saying, oh, I only got to put $20 in my gas tank as opposed to 70 that I was doing before, right? Yeah. Well, think about that. That $50 that I now have in my pocket that I can actually do some things that I want to do with, rather than go to my gas tank. So being that that's been actually a little bit of a propellant of holding us up, that's honestly the thing I worry about the most, is if we start to see that go the other way, especially in an environment where people aren't quite as confident about their jobs, that's where it could be problematic, is if we start seeing $4, $5, $6, $7 gas again for whatever reason. Now, we don't see a reason for that, but gas prices are really, really hard to predict, ever. So from that side, if that happens, that could be a force that could drive our economy downward from that perspective.
So I'm going to have you just touch on, because I know historically, politically, who becomes the president doesn't impact Wall Street or, the economy as much as what the average consumer believes.
Yep.
However, touch on that, because that's probably one of the most common questions I get on a daily basis is, Brad, how are you feeling? How's your investment team feeling about, the upcoming election going into 2025? We're coming off, high inflation, which is starting to lower. But what would you say to our listeners to maybe ease the pain a little bit, or should they be concerned?
It's a great question because you're getting asked it. I'm getting asked it literally every day as well. And it makes perfect sense. I totally understand it. I always tell people, I get it. You're hearing this stuff every day. They're talking about these big sweeping initiatives about they're going to come in and do something different, whatever it may be, right? From that perspective, though, I always just say, here's what my thought is we invest here at Gradient Investments, and when we invest portfolios, we invest in U.S. businesses for the most part. We don't invest in politicians. What we really try to say is, in my humble opinion, and you can feel free to dispute this if you'd like, but I think U.S. businesses are the most efficient and adaptable on the planet. And the reason for that is very simple. If they do not become efficient or adaptable, they go out of business and somebody else takes their business.
Right.
That's what we invest in, is we invest in things that we believe will supersede political cycles, if you will. Now, can politicians have an effect on economies? In the short term, absolutely, right? If they come up with initiatives that can both help and hurt, right? And we'll monitor those things. We'll pay attention to them. What you won't see us doing is try to predict those things well ahead of time and also influence portfolios aggressively on them. And the reason if I say that is very, very simple, is you have to get two things right when you do that. You have to get what the action is, right, which, again, in political environment is pretty much a coin flip. So you have to get that right. And then secondarily, what you have to get right is how the market reacts to it, which can be very different than what the actual precursor of it. Oh, if this happens, this is going to happen. A lot of times this doesn't happen, and even when it does, what the reaction is very different than what you anticipate. So we just think to our extent, trying to time those, trying to be invested based upon political action, to be completely honest, in our opinion, is not the best way to do it. Right. We would much rather monitor, pay attention, adjust based upon who we think it helps, who we think it hurts, provide that commentary saying, here's what we think, but we're not going to preemptively do these, especially during this season when everybody's promising things that probably have little to no chance to actually happen.
Right.
So from our side, it's just, we will monitor, we'll know what's going on. We are not, I talk with my team all the time. So I manage the investment team here at Gradient Investments, and we talk all the time. It is very rare, and honestly probably has not happened during my tenure here, about this is going to happen politically, so we're going to make this trade. It's just not what we do. We're going to pay a lot more attention to the health of the economy, the health of the companies we're talking about, and what we're paying for it. It's just much more valuable for us over longer periods of time.
Well, to further add to that, and a question, and we've had these conversations in the past and in training, does it have a little bit of an impact if maybe the House, the Senate, and the president is all one party or the other? Doesn't Wall Street favor the House and Senate being different parties?
Yeah.
Because
gridlock.
The likelihood, gridlock, and no major changes that would impact Americans could happen as easy.
Yeah. I put it very simply. When I'm doing these, I do a lot of client events, and right. and I talk in front of people, and I say very simply, I don't want them to do anything. That's my best goal. And I think if you truth serumed CEOs, they would say the exact same thing.
Oh, sure.
I would rather have them in absolute gridlock where they can't get in the way of what I'm trying to do for my business. That's the best. And honestly, the market has proven, if you just look historically, what's the best time for either president, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the best is a divided government that doesn't get a lot done. That's when we have the best returns in the stock market.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
The stock market does better.
Yeah, it just
there are certain times when I wish our government for our people didn't have gridlock. But
Right.
overall, for the economy and for the stock market, you're right. I mean, historically, it seems like gridlock, really, the market favors it.
It really does. And I think that's why. If you really want to get to the crux of why that happens, is because, again, businesses plan, right? And they plan beyond 2-year political cycles. Because, if you think about the House of Representatives, the day after they get elected, what are they trying to do? Get reelected, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. So they're thinking well beyond that. The CEOs of businesses, especially the businesses we invest in, have to think much longer than that. And so if Washington isn't an impediment to that, they can plan better, they can execute on those plans better.
Sure.
Well, great. Before I get to a very important next question, I just want to make a comment. And this is, I've been in this industry for over 30 years now. And just up until the last 10 years, and especially working with Gradient Investments and Jeremy and his team, I have never, and this is common with most financial planners, investment advisors, do not have access to talk to portfolio money managers. And what's amazing with that is not only can we talk to them, but if our clients want to talk to a portfolio manager, they're willing to take time out of their schedule to talk and answer those questions. Why is that so important? Because when major things happen, just like the pandemic, or whether, something goes south politically, we're being communicated with almost on a daily basis of what changes they're making, and their expertise and advice is advising us to make changes for our clients.
Yeah, that's huge. The fact, Brad, you're right. The fact that not only do you have access to the senior portfolio manager at Gradient Investments, but you can put them on the phone with your clients. And at some of the big box investment firms, that's never going to happen ever.
No. Yeah. And not only that, just like you mentioned, Jeremy, client events. I know we haven't got you down to Arizona yet, but I know before we started recording, you volunteered to come down in February from Minnesota. So that's a sign of brilliantness.
Oh, the invite, and I'll be on the next plane, right?
Yeah, January or February, I'm along too.
Okay. Well, I can tell you to all of our listeners, all of our clients to be, that we will have Tony and Jeremy in Arizona the first quarter of 2025.
That would be great.
To visit. But let me get to another question, which is very important, and there's probably not a day that goes by, especially the last week and a half, especially since the feds have decreased rates. That means most likely savings accounts, CDs, those interest rates will come down.
Yes.
So what advice would you give, because this can tie into income as well,
Absolutely.
To our listeners that, wow, I've been enjoying, which is hard for me to say knowing how long we've been around, they were happy with 5%.
Right.
I remember when CDs were paying 18%. So, but that 5 now is maybe 3 or 4.
Yeah, 5 feels great when you come from 0.
That's true.
Yeah, which is where we were at, basically.
So as we see that decrease, which we may see in the next year, time will tell, what advice would you give as far as other recommendations or income producing portfolios that are safe?
Yeah.
Maybe not guaranteed, but pretty conservative and safe, with the opportunity to keep that earning potential going.
Yeah. I always say, I think the biggest thing for me is understanding where you're at in risk currently. It's always the assessment for me, and I know you do a great job with this, is that the planning component of that comes into play, right? The income replacement for someone who worked for 30 to 35 years and now is not getting a check anymore because they're retiring. That is a big planning component, right? Is that we are going to have income replacement for you. We're also going to have safety. We're also going to try to grow this because inflation, as we said before, doesn't mean things get cheaper. Things are going to get more expensive. We need to grow to offset that. So I think the planning component is the biggest element of that. I always tell people, I can't invest you out of a bad plan. I really can't. I wish I could tell you that I can give you this magic investment. But what I can tell you is where the magic lies is understanding what that plan is. And your group, and understanding, if anyone is listening to this with regard to, I don't know where I'm at, that should be the first conversation that you have. Is somebody like Brad can come in and say, here's where you are right now. Here's the income we need to replace. Here's the investments that we need to do that we can get there. Some of these are going to be very safe where they're not going to move around with the markets. Some of them are, and that we hope, even though they ebb and flow, is that they'll be bigger over time. Putting those things together, especially in a rate reduction environment where you're not getting, you can't go to a CD anymore and get 5.5%, 6%. How do I replicate that? Well, I think there's a lot of different arrows you can do, but you have to understand how much risk am I taking to do that. That's where that conversation comes into play, because I always say there's no perfect investment for a perfect person. There's not one that fits. No. It's usually a multitude that gets them to what they need. And I always think that that's the bigger approach to take.
Wow. And I am so happy for you to talk about that and say that, because my experience, especially before Gradient, overall, our industry and people in your position, Jeremy, it's investments, investments, investments. There's no talk of other strategies like fixed index annuities, life insurance, that they even recommend for a person's portfolio for risk tolerance.
Yeah.
Everyone's risk tolerance is different. Now, if you're 30 years old, which you are, Jeremy, right? You started at 5 years old in the industry.
30 several years in a row now, amazingly.
You can take more risk than, say, Tony, who's 85 or 86?
I'm enjoying my 70s.
Exactly. No. We're the same age. So we take that very serious, and to be lined up, because as a financial planner, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Arizona, we have access to any money manager, any firm that we want to work with on Wall Street. We have chosen Gradient Investments and Jeremy and his team because they understand holistic financial planning. They understand risk. And one last thing I'll share with this, in 2022, of course, the markets were down.
Yeah.
Which was an ugly year.
It was an ugly year.
But all the reviews that I did in 2022, Jeremy, just because of what you have done with the portfolios and the other planning we have done, not one of our clients overall in their portfolio was down.
Nice.
Some portfolios was down, a lot were up, but overall, they don't have to worry and have the stress of how am I going to come up with that 20% loss for the rest of my life, especially if I'm 75.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And there's no, cookie cutters should not exist. Cookie cutters should exist for cookies, right? That's great for cookies.
That sounds good.
For somebody who is coming into retirement, especially somebody who is having a life transition such as that, which is it's one of the most massive ones you're going to have.
Yeah.
I just don't think a cookie cutter fits, right? Is that I always say that there's very few actual bad investments out there, but there's a lot of bad fits, right? And so you have to understand what fits properly. And if you can do that and you can plan it in the proper fashion, you're probably going to be good during the bad and good times, which is what we want for our clients.
Yeah. And there have been portfolios out there, too, that if you're looking for a little more conservative or steady return, there have been portfolios that can offer that, like a buffered index portfolio.
Yes.
Are those?
Absolutely. That's what they're designed for, is they have an inherent level of protection, but also upside, right?
Sure.
Is that if the markets continue to rally, you're going to participate. If the markets are down, you're going to have some level of protection. We have various components of that protection, some all the way to 100%. But again, it's understanding who that is a fit for. Some people want the greater amount of upside, and they'll take less protection. Some people want greater protection and take less amount of upside.
And that's where Brad comes in, because everybody's situation is different. It's not right for everyone, but it's just another arrow in the quiver, as you say.
That's exactly right.
That's right. And to have that ability just makes my life personally wonderful. And the reason why I'm never going to retire, sitting down and making an impact, because I know, we've all talked to people that lost 20, 30, 40, even 50% of their life savings during the 08 crisis. And giving them peace of mind, letting them sleep at night helps me sleep at night, which is great.
Yeah. Knowing you don't have to look at your portfolio every single day and worry about a recession or a 20% correction out there, knowing that you have a solid plan in place and you can sleep well at night. knowing that no matter what happens, you're going to have that money there when you need it. That's huge.
Yeah, and I always tell people, it's like, well, my job is to not tell you to not be concerned, right? Concerns are going to happen all the time.
Oh, yeah,
We're
for
always
sure.
going to have things that are out there. My job is to tell you how we've prepared for that and what we're doing for that component of that. So always concerns. There's always going to be concerns. That's the one thing, my boss, you know him very well,
Yes.
Mike Binger. He's
Never
been
heard of him.
He's been in there for 35 plus
Yes.
years. We always joke around. When was that year that nobody had any concerns and everything just went straight up? It's like, I just wish we had those because I haven't lived through that yet. I'm hoping. I'm really looking for the day that happens, but I don't think it's gonna. I think there's always going to be concerns out there, and feel free to tell me what your concerns are. We can tell you what we think of it, and then secondarily how we've planned for it.
Sure. I think that's huge. Well, this has
Yes.
been a great discussion. Brad, is there anything you want to add to wrap it up or add for our listeners today before we go?
Absolutely. Hopefully you learned a lot and got a lot of great knowledge. I really want to thank Jeremy for taking the time. If you have any questions, let us know. We can pass those on to Jeremy and get answers for you. But, one thing I was just thinking of is you're talking concerns, and there's no guarantees in this world. We all experience life. Is our philosophy at Cooper Financial is we hope for the best, but we're preparing for the worst.
Yep.
Because you're going to see both during your lifetime.
Yeah.
So, but yes, if you have questions, you can call our office at 888-390-5277. Again, that's 888-390-5277, or typing your questions at financialarmorshow.com. Again, financialarmorshow.com, and type those questions in. I'll pass those on to Jeremy. Or maybe you're just sitting on the fence and thinking, wow, I have a lot of money. I'm nervous. I'm scared. Maybe, could I talk to you, Brad? Could I maybe talk to Jeremy in the weeks to come?
Sure.
Absolutely. And I thank you, Jeremy, for that and all the knowledge and wisdom you provided, not only on today's show, but also for our practice and giving our clients peace of mind.
Happy to do it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. This was a great show. You provided a lot of great information, both of you. And listeners, that does it for today's episode of the Financial Armor Show with our host, Brad Cooper, and special guest today, Jeremy Bryan.